Okay, so normally I try to avoid being grumpy and angry in my videos. But it looks like this video might just have to be one of those exceptions. So I've been doing a series where I go episode by episode through Star Trek Picard, and I just finished season one. So I was getting ready to start season two, but I just kept putting it off and putting it off because at every point when I thought I was going to do it, I just never felt like getting down and watching season two, episode one. And I finally got around to doing it, or deciding to do it a couple weeks ago. And I got about 15 minutes in, and then I grumpily shut it off and went to bed since it was late and I was really tired. So I'm like, I'm sleepy. And I'm kind of like, why am I doing this to myself? I'd rather get some sleep. Grumble, 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 grumble. Now, this is when I do watch through season two, it's going to be really only my second time going through season two. I've watched season one quite a number of times. I think season one is just a lot better in a lot of ways. But I do like season two. It's really just those first couple of episodes that I wasn't as big of a fan of. But I think now I'm realizing that what I actually completely disliked about season two, rather than just finding it mildly annoying and below my probably rather high expectations, has got to be more than anything literally the part that I just watched, which is literally the first like 10 minutes. So anyway, finally I did get back to it and actually watch it again. I started at the beginning again and watched through that same part again when I wasn't sleepy, at the end of a long day, preferring to go to bed. And then at about 12 minutes in, I grumpily hit the pause button, gave a great big frustrated sigh, and said to myself, okay, I've had enough of this. Why don't I just get it out of my system? I can deal with the rest of the episode later. Why don't I just spit out all my grumbling onto my computer keyboard, before a xenomorph bursts out of my chest? But pardon me, I'm mixing metaphors from the wrong franchise. Oh, well. So let me begin my grumbling. And for the record, since I wrote this yesterday, I'm feeling a lot better today. So that's why I can read all my negative words. I mean, we'll see how it comes out. We'll see whether my grumpy spirit comes out, or maybe I can read all these sarcastic, angry comments in a pleasant voice. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So let me begin my grumbling. First off, the opening scene where they just show you a bunch of hallways and the bridge of the ship. We don't know what it is, or we've never seen it before and don't particularly care. And they just show all these weird camera angles that don't actually show you anything except a bunch of crew members who are really tense and clearly something desperate is happening, but we don't know or particularly care what it is. They don't have any wonderful, exciting music or exciting elements of any kind or anything interesting at all. They're just showing people being tense and miserable, and I'm supposed to be pulled in by this? I came here to watch a story, not a bunch of lopsided camera angles on a weird ship with random people I've never seen wandering around because of a desperate situation that just got pulled out of nowhere. At least they still have the Voyager-ish uniforms. I mean, I like that. And there were sparks flying when bad things happened, when compartments blew up or things like that. That's going to make me feel at home. Sparks and yellow shirts. But other than that, I'm just feeling really annoyed. I'm also annoyed because even though we have yellow shirts and sparks, I'm just realizing while watching it that these new creators just apparently decided that traditional Starfleet phasers aren't exciting enough. So in this new world, apparently all Starfleet phasers are burst weapons. Every single stinking one. Yeah, I'm annoyed. And I don't find this exciting. And then as the scene goes on, we get a reference to auto-destruct. Well, that's original. So thrilling. Blow up the ship, Picard. Yeah, let's do that. And then this unseen Borg-ish thing, which they called a she, and which is just mysteriously off screen, just like everything with these annoying camera angles that show you nothing interesting. And then this unseen thing just says Picard in a Borg-ish voice, and he turns to look at it with great big eyes of shock. Okay. And that's the end of the teaser. So, I mean, at that point, I figure, well, I can overlook all that and keep watching. After all, if there's going to be Borg in this, it can't be that bad. And if these are the guys that created season one, it can't be that bad. And then from there, we go into the intermission sequence, and it's It's kind of like the one we had in season one, but just a little different. It's got some Borg in it, so that seems cool. So I can just kind of hang on, just kind of like, let's wait until we get a chance to actually see what this story is about. I can handle that. And long story short, by the time I got to episode 3, I'm talking about my first time watching it back when it was a new release. By the time I got to episode 3, I was enjoying the story. Because by that point, they finally settled down and quit giving you these random bits of weirdness just thrown at you from every direction that's just like out of the blue. And they actually started giving you a story that made sense and that you can actually follow, and see things in it that are worth noticing. And so I guess I'll get to see this time around. I'll get to see if I still feel the same way once I get, as I go over the next couple episodes in the next week or two. But this time, just for that first little opening bit, I couldn't seem to get past that first 15 minutes without having to let off some steam. So, I mean, yeah, a lot of the opening stuff I just found annoying because it seems random and totally disconnected from where we left off, kind of like a typical bad sequel of a movie. It's like they think they're going to hold my attention by throwing a bunch of random stuff on the screen and blowing it up. And I'm like, do you really think I came to this show for that? Why don't you blow up my toaster? That'll get my attention a little more. And then randomly, 7 of 9 is on board the La Serena fighting off some random bad guys because of, well, no one really knows why. They're just bad guys. And she's on the La Serena because, well, somebody's got to be on the La Serena. And she's out in the middle of nowhere all by herself doing Fenrisy things all on her own because, oh, nobody cares. It's all just so we can see the Rios holograms blasting some baddies, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because if the ship can make holograms to blast the baddies, couldn't the ship just blast the baddies without any holograms? Or heck, just beam them out into space or something. Computer, shoot the intruders. Choo, choo, choo. Thank you, computer. Now, please make me a cup of coffee, beam it into my left hand, and get me a Reader's Digest. So yeah, at that point, I'm just really annoyed. But in between these random and annoying mishmashes of random bits of video game-ish crazy stuff, we get this one sequence, this relatively calm, but really out of left field, stilted and downright weird sequence on the vineyard. And this is literally the most off-putting scene possibly in the whole season. Like the other stuff I just find annoying. And assuming it will last forever, I can sit through some annoying scenes or even whole episodes like that. It's just a little annoying. I mean, it's kind of like the creators can't make up their mind about what genre they're trying to produce for. They offered me some thought-provoking drama with overtones of philosophy and psychology, but then at some point there was some kind of bait and switch, and instead they're feeding me this pile of cheap space action with no substance to it. And they're like, they passed me the dinner plate, and on the plate is just a whole bunch of severed Borg parts popping and sizzling in this mishmashed pile, and that's my dinner. I'm not a fan at that point. But so that's just annoying. I can handle that, a little bit of that, and then we'll get to some good stuff. But this second scene, in between the other ones I mentioned, this second scene in the episode, it's not just annoying, it's so off-putting as to really ruin a lot of the story for me. And disclaimer, since I'm getting really carried away with my grumpy outburst here, or at least I was when I was writing it, I guess I'm having a little fun with it reading it, but yesterday when I wrote this, I was getting pretty carried away with my grumpy outburst. But I do like most of Picard season 2, just in case I forgot to say that. But right now I'm just grumpy grumbling. I'm breaking my own rules. So basically, after we started off with that random tense space action scene in the teaser with that random ship and a bunch of random yellow shirts running around, and then some random Borg-ish thing saying Picard, So after that, and we get the teaser, and then we come back and they take us back in time to the vineyard, I think it's like 48 hours ago or something. And they show us some very brief moments of Picard just enjoying his life on the vineyard. And then right when you think you might be moving toward a compelling story, instead they just throw madness in your face by giving Picard a bizarrely sterile love scene where Picard's freshly widowed housekeeper tries to guilt him into having sex with her with this really stiff logical proposition that she gives him. And then he moves in to kiss her with this gracious fatherly smile on his face until he realizes what he's doing. And then this is supposed to be the setup for Picard's great dilemma that the whole season's going to be about. How Picard should have shacked up with his freshly widowed housekeeper if he wasn't so emotionally repressed by his mother issues. And then he ends up supposedly hurting her by rejecting her robot-like proposition. Because even though she offered herself to him as a logical proposition with no hint of indicating any feelings being involved, but then the moment he rejects her, she acts like a wounded animal and says she has to leave forever unless he agrees to fall for her. But the way the story goes, he's the one who's supposed to feel guilty about the whole thing. And the moral of the story at the end is that he should have just put away his fatherly feelings and had sex with the housemaid. That would have been the right thing to do. Okay. Pardon me. Sometimes I just get grumpy and grumbly. I do like Picard season 2. Honest, I do. Just not this scene. I don't like this scene at all. The only thing I like is the fact that Picard chose not to finalize that kiss with that gracious, appeasing, fatherly smile on his face. But then Picard is supposed to regret that. What the heck? Meaningful relationship is not interchangeable with romance or sex. And shacking up with Laris for Picard makes no sense whatsoever. Not in any way, not in the slightest way. And being guilted into it under the idea that there's something wrong with him for not jumping on her sooner? Please, this is ridiculous. So anyway, why don't I take a break from my unrestrained complaining and why don't I dig out something I wrote a while back? So as I was getting ready for this, I just went and dug out something that I jotted down back in September 23, so about 9 months ago, as I was reflecting on this particular story element in season 2 back in September. And so at the time I decided, since I had this stuff on my mind, I decided to just jot down some of my thoughts, and I figured I can do something with it whenever I get around to it. I think what put it on my mind back then, because that wasn't when I was watching through it, I think I was listening to a podcast about Picard season 2. And since I disagreed with nearly everything they said on the podcast, I ended up thinking about it a lot, and then I ended up just kind of jotting down my thoughts for later. And this is actually the second half of the file where I jotted this down, because the first half, which I'm not going to include in this video, but basically I went through and listed and talked about Picard's romantic relationships from Next Generation and beyond. Basically to answer the question of whether Picard is likely to be, quote unquote, into Laris in that kind of way at all, which I answer with an emphatic no, a million times no. But I'm probably going to make another video where I talk about that part. And in this video, I'm just going to share that second half where I talk more about the scene in particular here, and then also just how it resolves at the end of the season. So anyway, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read through it and see if my opinion has changed at all since I wrote this, or if I'm still mostly in the same space on the topic. So, and I'm going to read it on my iPad so you can tell the difference between me reading my script, which is, everything I say, versus me reading something I wrote way back, which is not necessarily what I wrote yesterday. So here's what I wrote. Like most of the elements in the pilot episode of season 2, I found the scenes with Laris to be jarring and disorienting. The scene, including her initial expression of romantic interest, instantly created for me subjective feelings of disgust. Yeah, that part's still true. Which elements caused this reaction for me? Perhaps the age difference, or more likely, the fact that he is her boss, and last time we saw her, she was one half of an inseparable married couple. And as far as us on screen go, like literally the last thing we saw, that's where things were. And so, yeah, some time has passed, which is a year and a half, which isn't that much for somebody who's been married for, I think she was, 30, 40 years or something. But anyway, as far as we're concerned, it was literally 10 minutes ago. Anyway, that and the fact that regardless of the number of years between them, Picard literally looks old enough that he might crumble if you touch him. While it's not hard to imagine a household servant developing feelings for her boss, there's something disorienting and upsetting about such a long-standing relationship between a great-grandfather and his long-married subordinate suddenly becoming romantic and sexual. And I find it hard to believe that she actually would develop those feelings, to be honest. But maybe that has less to say about the actual psychological possibility in real life and more to say about the fact that she lacked enough emotional intelligence to gradually express such things as those feelings grew. And the authors also chose not to provide any foreshadowing. So it all just came out of the blue, which, yeah, that's still how it looks to me. And I still find it really annoying and off-putting. And then I put in parentheses, as with most of the pilot of season 2, the creators just dumped it all on us, as if they had no respect for our love for season 1. In that sense, the pilot of season 2 felt to me like it suffered from bad movie sequel syndrome, where we come into a sequel expecting to at least recognize the story from where we left off, but instead we have nothing to grip onto as we transition to what follows. Yeah, I definitely still feel that way. While I was very put off by the plot element, I enjoyed observing Picard's reactions, watching his warm fatherly affection as he affirmingly listens to everything she says, hiding his shock and trying to let her feel understood. And then he almost kisses her with that fatherly smile, which of course is enough to make someone vomit, and such relief when he turns away because he realizes what he's doing. He realizes the same inherent contradiction that the watcher can see on his face, the disjunction between the kind of smile that's on his face and the action of moving in to kiss that very person. Now, this paragraph, I said at the beginning, I enjoyed observing Picard. No, I enjoyed nothing this time around. And then Picard is put into a dilemma. Does he cut off this long-lasting relationship or sexualize it? From my point of view, the answer to the dilemma is obvious. One would have thought he had come a long way from ancient times when masters would often enjoy having sex with their servants. Or, pardon me. One would have thought we had come a long way from ancient times when masters would often enjoy having sex with their servants. But perhaps we haven't. Perhaps the moral of this thread in season 2 is that Picard should have been okay moving down the path of sexualizing this relationship. So what went wrong here? Since we know so little about Laris's internal experience, it's hard to say exactly what went wrong. But what we must say is that something has gone wrong, and it's not Picard's non-romantic, non-sexual love for his housekeeper. The fact that he values her, but is not in a romantic or sexual way. However the story resolves, or however the story could resolve, however the story resolves, it can't resolve without suffering. The answer is not for all love to just be interchangeable with romantic or sexual love. The answer is not for elderly homeowners to be perpetually open to having sex with their housekeepers as long as the husband has finally kicked the bucket. And then I say, now I'm kind of moving on to kind of like the way a lot of my videos are structured is how I put down my jot notes here, which is describing how I felt about the episode and then kind of moving on to kind of a more practical, like if this kind of situation happens in real life, how could it be handled? That kind of thing. So I say, the place where I would like to do the psychological analysis in order to envision an effective and healing solution to this dilemma is not in Picard's psyche, but in Laris's. Picard lovingly and affectionately approaches Laris after the uncomfortable incident in order to try to communicate about what's happening. And he wants them both to be able to go on in their former relationship. But instead of providing any kind of feedback or insight into what has been going on inside her psyche, instead, she simply provides an ultimatum and leaves. She demonstrates that the feelings that have been growing inside her are apparently far, far beyond any point of control. She's about to lose her mind, and she must receive either consummation or exit. To what extent might this actually be the result of earlier internal violent denial of her feelings? Maybe after the death of her husband, did she maybe find her romantic feelings for her husband transferring to Picard as Picard affectionately helped her deal with the loss? Did she maybe react violently to these feelings inside and try to stamp them out instead of accepting them as part of the confusing mental noise that typically results from the fact that we are biopsychosocial entities and we have things popping in our heads, that kind of thing. Perhaps her lack of internal acceptance of these feelings caused them to grow and balloon into something out of control. Perhaps because, once again, we have been given no insight into the psychological journey of Laris, because the writers bring this up kind of abruptly out of nowhere, out of the blue. They give us no hints about anything that leads up to this. And then I give a different perspective. I say, here's another way to look at the history of this problem. Perhaps the problem is not that she experienced transference and felt so ashamed of it that she exacerbated it through inner avoidance and denial. Perhaps, maybe instead, these are just feelings that naturally developed because she actually finds this old man to be really hot and sexy. And even though he's about 40 years older than her late husband, and she's only recently got over the grieving. I mean, it's possible. So if that's the case, here's another way we could look at the history of the problem. in the uncomfortable scene that just happened, the scene with the two of them where she kind of offered herself to him. It's kind of like she dropped a bag of bricks on Picard. That was very uncomfortable for both parties, but it didn't actually come out of nowhere. Her feelings were clearly growing for a very long time, but she seems to lack the emotional intelligence and the ability to clearly communicate her feelings. Or perhaps it's not her inability to communicate clearly, but her unwillingness due to fear, perhaps, which would go back to the previous section of, feeling like she has to stop her feelings. Either way, Laris has an unbearable burden on her back that she has been keeping to herself, either through choice or through lack of communication skill. And when she finally unloads it, there's no hope. And then I go into like more practical stuff. Generally speaking, most people can get over romantic feelings for someone if they receive a clear, unequivocal rejection, and if they experientially believe that the rejection is final. In this case, however, her feelings had been pent up for so long that she was already so madly in love with Picard that the pain would be unbearable if she spent any more time with him. If she had communicated these feelings earlier, then she could have received a rejection, and the budding feelings would most likely dried out over time, unless she didn't actually experientially believe the rejection to be final, either because of cultural patterns and norms, or because of fickle personality of the romantic interest, or lack of social awareness in herself. And I like that little paragraph that I just put there. I think it's very practical because there's a lot of situations that we're all going to face where you have, some of these weird dynamics happening. And I think that paragraph I wrote, I think it sums up a lot of the ideas very well. It's going to read that over again. Generally speaking, most people can get over romantic feelings for someone if they receive a clear, unequivocal rejection, and if they experientially believe that the rejection is final. In this case, however, her feelings had been pent up for so long that she was already so madly in love, quote unquote, with Picard, that the pain would be unbearable, as she saw it, if she spent any more time with him. But maybe if she'd communicated those feelings earlier, and if they were understood, maybe she could have received a rejection, and those budding feelings could have just dried out over time. But then the exception where that wouldn't have happened, where that wouldn't have worked, would be if she wasn't able to actually experientially believe the rejection to be final. And some things that could make it so that she couldn't believe it to be final would be, there could be definitely cultural patterns and norms that would make it so that somebody really couldn't accept a rejection because it's probably not final. It's probably going to change, So cultural patterns and norms can play a big role in that, or the fickle personality of the romantic interest. Maybe that person, he said no, or she said no, but it's going to change. He's going to change his mind, or just lack of social awareness in herself. In the case of someone like Laris, if the person actually just struggles to understand, other people, that could definitely be a big barrier. Like if you just know, people are just weird, and because of that, it's probably going to change, and it doesn't mean that you actually would formalize, the person's going to change their mind, but it can just be in the back of your head, like experientially, you feel that it's a legit possibility. Anyway, so then I go on and say, in such a situation where there were normal romantic feelings growing in Laris without being caused or exacerbated by semi-neurotic mental habits, I'm implying that it seems like she has semi-neurotic mental habits. But anyway, in such a situation where there were normal romantic feelings going, but such feelings were coupled with clear communication and openness by both parties, rather than just openness by Picard, it may be that they actually wouldn't have been able to maintain their former type of friendship. It may be that they would have become more emotionally distant from one another and eventually parted ways. And of course, life is full of people who love one another non-romantically, non-sexually. In other words, they have meaningful friendships. And they part ways. They part ways with smiles and perhaps a little bit of crying. And such instances of parting are not the end of the world. They aren't the flaming tragedy that we feel when Picard and Laris separate on very uncomfortable terms, with Picard feeling this big old gaping hole of guilt inside him for rejecting this person he has so much fatherly affection for. Should Picard feel guilty for this? And then I put on here at the end. I mean, that could be the ending right there. That'd be a great place to end it. Should Picard feel guilty for this? Like, really? And then, of course, it reverses at the end of the season. While there are many elements, and here's these last two paragraphs is kind of my concluding thoughts as I finished up my little jot note there. While there are many elements of Picard season 2 that I love, I think the message sent by the conclusion of the Laris Picard thread is unfortunate. I think that when Picard and Laris fall in love at the end of season 2, the watcher is being shown an unhelpful message, which is that unrequited love ought to be requited, even when it repulses one of the parties. That having sex with your housekeeper is something that will bring greater peace and flexibility to the world. A much more agreeable conclusion to this story would have involved, let's say, Picard meeting somebody on his journeys who's closer to his age and closer to the kinds of personalities he finds attractive. And then that Laris would do the same somewhere else. And then at some point, way down the road, maybe they end up in the same household again as that kind of, boss-employee relationship. They end up in the same household again, but with no romantic feelings for one another. And it might take 10 years for that to happen, possibly. And maybe Picard will be dead by then. But other than that, I think the message portrayed by that kind of alternate story would be far more helpful for the countless number of watchers who are watching this story, who, in real life, people watching this story are people who, by odds, are going to face complicated emotional experiences in real life. And we all are people who will, to some degree, live based on what we've experienced on television. So that's the stuff that I pull out of my little jot note there. That's the end of the bit that I wrote back in September 23. I mostly still agree with it. Some of my subjective feelings have definitely changed. This time watching through the scene, I didn't find a drop of enjoyment, like that one part where I said, well, I enjoyed watching Picard's, kind reactions. I didn't enjoy any of it. This time watching through the scene, I didn't find a drop of enjoyment. I was just, quote unquote, holding my nose the whole time, so to speak. And also, when I rewatched it this time, I noticed, in distinction from what I wrote last year, there was this distinctly inappropriate aspect in which Laris really approached Picard not by expressing her fondness for him and saying, in some direct or indirect way, saying that she would like to have a different category of relationship with him, but she's basically started off by suggesting that there must be something wrong with him for, quote unquote, choosing to be alone his whole life. And basically she implied that he ought, in some sense, to move in on her. And this adds a whole additional level of problem, in my opinion. No one should ever use guilt or insinuation that something is wrong with the other person. No one should ever use that kind of thing in order to get the person to enter into a romantic or sexual relationship. That's disrespectful, manipulative, and wrong, whether it's done on purpose or on accident. If someone doesn't want you and you expressing your affection or your admiration for them doesn't change that, it's not right to try to use their insecurities or vulnerabilities or tenderness of conscience to suggest that they should like you or that they would like you if they just fixed their issues. If he or she doesn't like you, that's all there is to it. And the end result of this is that tender-hearted old Picard, he almost bit the bait, and he was half an inch away from sleeping with her just to be nice, which is, shall we say, not how life is supposed to work, at least not with the kind of view of sexuality where I'm coming from. And I recognize that not everyone comes from the same kind of perspective on that subject. And I also recognize that could be possibly a significant part of the issue here as well. This could be partly just a difference in terms of perspectives on how sexual relationships ideally work in the first place. I guess I recognize that. Then the other part that I find a little intriguing as I look back on what I wrote back in 23 is the whole thing about wondering if the reason Laris had such intense feelings is maybe because she had earlier tried to shut down these more basic level feelings that spontaneously emerged as intrusive thoughts or transference or something like that. So the idea that she may have had some basic level popping into your head thoughts and feelings, which we all have, and we all have things, statistically speaking, most people have things pop in their heads as intrusive thoughts or impulses, which are sometimes going to fit within our value system and sometimes are going to fall far outside of what we believe to be acceptable behavior. So it's normal to have things pop in your head that if you were to act on them, that would be wrong as you see it. That's normal. But anyway, so the idea that maybe that's where things started with her, and then by over-focusing on these feelings, by trying to quash them, maybe she actually gave them life, and these feelings ended up becoming this kind of bizarre falling in love with great-grandpa kind of thing. And so in what I wrote in 23, I kind of focused on that as the main possibility. And then I moved on to the possibility that, well, maybe it was more, these normal feelings without that extra explanation, which the way I put it, it's quite obvious that I thought that would be very odd, you know. But anyway, on that topic, I see it a bit differently this time going through it. Actually, I had forgot that I said that until I went back and looked at it again as I was putting this video together. But the difference this time around is that I noticed how when she's making her proposition to Picard, she started with telling him, before any of the other things, she started off by telling him that back when she married Jabban, it was an arranged marriage, and she grew into love with him. That romantic love was something that grew gradually after the arranged marriage, after she was already married. And then she goes on to say that within her tradition and expectations, she can do that again, or she expects to do that again, something like that. So that's how she brought the topic up. So she very much implied that she was pursuing Picard in a very logical kind of way within her tradition. If she does have an infatuation with Picard at this point, then she's trying very hard to make any feeling she has to be an incidental thing, or more so to be completely hidden. You know, like she's not leading with that. She's kind of implying that they're either not there or they're kind of incidental. And she also, even though she acts emotionless, so it would make sense to suggest she's got these emotionally repressive habits of internal avoidance, like I suggested before. But at the same time, the story that she's telling Picard is not that she's fallen for him, but rather that it's logical for them to get together, and that Picard is the one who's practicing inner avoidance. That is exactly what she's saying to him. So the more closely you look at this scene, things really just stay weird. On the one hand, Laris is saying that love feelings, i.e. romantic attachment and all the other feelings that come with it, are flexible and fluid and can change over time based on your behaviors, which is all very true. I mean, based on your behaviors and your mental habits and other things, but based on stuff that can change. But then in the very next scene, when Laris says she has to leave, Laris is claiming that she can't possibly continue living on the vineyard unless she can have this romantic relationship with Picard, which supposedly is all about, logic and tradition and stuff. Which I suppose probably just means she's confused. And she doesn't know how to she doesn't know how to just slow down, show some respect for Picard, and let these violent emotions she's got, these emotions of embarrassment and probably infatuation, and just kind of give it a little time before going off, all crazy. And I guess a part of that too, probably a part of that as well, is just the fact that in that scene with the two of them, the uncomfortable scene, quote unquote, Picard wasn't able to give her a clear and firm rejection, which may also have contributed to her really violent emotions and this overwhelming feeling that she can't stay. So anyway, Laris's perspective or beliefs related to any of this is really just not clear at all. But the message that comes through in the end, by the way the story's told, the message that comes through in the end does seem to suggest that the person who's got romantic feelings for a friend must either receive sex and romance or end the relationship, and the other person must choose between either becoming sexually and romantically involved or losing the friendship. And also, to go with that, this kind of seems like this implication that there should not be a strong perceived distinction between having a meaningful connection with a person like Laris and having a sexual and romantic connection with that same person. Like the difference is, it shouldn't be a big deal. But I mean, things aren't that simple. In this situation here, and situations like that, there are a lot of psychological moving parts at play. And depending on the habits and values and the character of the people involved, if the feelings are expressed early enough and clearly enough, and if the other person's rejection is clear enough and firm enough and is actually believed, the friendship can probably be salvaged. But if not, so let's say that because the person with the feelings just keeps on hanging on in the back of their mind, has this shred of hope, that the person's feelings will change. So the friendship can't be salvaged. The other person's feelings are, just get stronger and stronger. In that situation, mature adults with good mental health should be able to part on good terms, recognizing that life is full of change. And the person doing the rejecting is not in the wrong, should not feel guilty, and should never feel ashamed for going to bed alone. Let me say that again. If not, if the friendship cannot be salvaged, mature adults with good mental health should be able to part on good terms, recognizing that life is full of change. And the person doing the rejecting is not in the wrong, should not feel guilty, and should never feel ashamed for going to bed alone. Anyway, enough on Laris and Picard. Now that I've got the xenomorph out of my chest, I'm feeling much better. And of course, I wrote all my grumbling yesterday, and I'm sharing it today. And I think even before I started to read, I already felt like I had the xenomorph out of my chest, and I felt much better. And I'm looking forward to going forward, talking about green Borg queens and elderly Qs losing their powers and all that good stuff that I can hopefully talk about without excessively grumbling all day long. Anyway, if you want more videos like this one, minus all the complaining and griping and grumbling, then go ahead and hit subscribe, and see you around in the next one.